Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover three topics. The first one's going to be the EU-Armenia visa liberalization negotiations. Then we're going to move on to the verdict against Archbishop Ajapahian. And then we're going to close with some civil aviation-related news. Armenian Deputy Prime Minister Meher Grigoryan and European Commissioner for Enlargement Martakos noted during discussions in Yerevan recently that visa liberalization process is one of the key components of Armenia-EU relations. Meher Grigoryan announced in a joint statement with Martakos.
We also noted that one of the key components of bilateral relations is the process of visa liberalization. We highlighted with satisfaction the progress made in this direction to date. I'm sure that tangible achievements will be reached through joint efforts.
If this comes to pass, it would actually be a very significant development. And one of the first things we'll do is actually raise the value of Armenian citizenship. This will essentially mean that Armenian citizens can travel through most of Europe, if not entirely visa-free, but in a process that's much easier than what it is right now. Part of it in this country that we have rising incomes and cheap travel, it's actually a lot more people that can actually travel abroad, so it's becoming far more routine. What's interesting here that at this moment, Armenia is actually the only country in Europe that's in negotiations with the EU for visa-free travel. I'm sure some will say, well, this just makes it easier for people to leave the country. It's not that simple. This is part of a development process. I'm sure some of that will happen, but that's the price you pay for moving up in the scale of countries, having the freedom to go around the world. There's also a very distinct political angle here. It's very obvious that the EU is trying to help this government in the next election by giving them something tangible that they can take to voters with their Western pivot. And this will obviously mean the most to voters that are actually most skeptical of this government, which is urban middle-class voters that are the hardest ones for them to get. This would actually mean the most to them. If this happens, this would actually be quite an accomplishment for our diplomatic team and our foreign ministry, and they would deserve a lot of credit for it. Last week, a Yerevan court sentenced Archbishop Ajapahian to a 2-year sentence for going on television and advocating for a coup against the current government. He was convicted in an unusually quick trial, in a trial that many think is politically motivated. Let me say a few things about this. I'm really not a big fan of the Archbishop, and he was obviously wrong in advocating a coup against an elected democratic government. This is even more so given the fact that he's actually supposed to be a spiritual figure. However, this verdict is unjust since we don't want to go down the road of criminalizing speech if that speech does not lead to action. If he was actually plotting a coup or part of it, yes, go ahead, prove the case, and go ahead and prosecute him, but not just for expressing his opinion. If freedom of speech means anything, it's protecting the freedom of speech of unpopular people and people that you most disagree with. I would hope that our president will use his pardon powers, which he does have, to actually pardon the Archbishop. For those of you who disagree with me, and I know many of you would, I would ask you to look at Georgia and how quickly you can go from a much freer system to a far less freer system, just the happenings that we've seen in that country in the last couple of months. We certainly do not want to go down that road. We will close with talking about aviation news, specifically the announced expansion of the Zvartnots International Airport in Yerevan. A $500 million investment will double the size of the airport in Yerevan over the next 10 years. Boarding gates will increase from 6 to 16. Arrival halls, immigration zone, and customs areas will more than double. Modern lounges will be built, parking will be extended, and you'll have improved public transportation. We will also be moving towards automated digital passport gates and new biometric passport systems. This is needed since passenger numbers have grown far beyond forecasts in the last 2 years, reaching over 5.5 million annually. The current airport was built for smaller level of passenger traffic. Given the increased number of flights and tourist flows, this has become necessary. This likely comes as part of a deal that gives the current operator another long-term monopoly, something that I'm not a big fan of. But at this point, we have bigger issues to worry about. This news of expansion of Zvartnots was actually joined by more aviation news, specifically having to do with Wizz Air. For those of you who don't know what Wizz Air is, it's one of the biggest budget airlines in the world. And they established Yerevan as one of their hubs, and which means their planes will be based out of here, which also means that there will be a lot more flights, and this will become a connecting point for other flights around the world. And part of this kickoff was actually a flight that started for the first international flight, actually towards the west from Gyumri International Airport to Cyprus with the absurdly low price of 14 euros. You can actually fly from Gyumri to Cyprus for that amount. As transportation gets easier between Yerevan and Gyumri, especially with the building of the modern north-south highway, if we actually come close to that 1 hour time period, drive time between Yerevan and Gyumri, which is possible if you have really good highways. This would also mean an expansion of the airport in Gyumri because it becomes a lot more practical for airlines to fly there also. We're going to close this section with actually the most controversial part of aviation news this week, which was that Turkish Airlines has announced that it's going to start daily flights to Armenia. Many people don't know there actually already are daily flights between Yerevan and Istanbul through Pegasus, which is a Turkish budget airline, but this will be joined by the much more relevant Turkish Airlines. This is, given the amount of tourist traffic that goes into Turkey, this is actually a very good thing because we can get some of that overflow traffic. And the more flights you have, especially from really good airlines, it's actually better for your country. I think this is one issue that regardless of what we think of that country politically, we need to separate politics from the practicalities and take this as a minor good that will be helping us in developing our tourism sector. Thank you for joining me this week's episode of Insights.
The priest is preaching from a shallow grave. He counts his money, then he paints you saved. Talking to the young folks share the same jokes, but they're meeting all the places